Showtime, folks. Welcome to episode 110 of Cookie Pocket, the third episode of season 5. And today we're going to be talking about Bob Fosse's All That Jazz. This is my first pick of this season, my first musical pick of this season, which I realized last episode there's quite a few of. And essentially it's like a pseudo-biographical film about this choreographer slash Broadway director named Joe Gideon, who's basically a loose template for Bob Fosse himself, and kind of his self-destructive lifestyle and his relationship with the people who he works with and his family, and especially his daughter and his ex-wife. And things get pretty hairy in the second half. I'm keeping it kind of vague because it is sort of, Mitchell, you pointed out, it's quite stream of consciousness. So to describe this as an actual pointed narrative would require lots of sentences. But I don't want to go into too much detail. Since we're doing kind of our looser structure, let's just jump right into it. What did you guys think of All That Jazz?
Well, I should preface this by saying that I literally just finished All That Jazz. I'm jumping straight from the credits into this recording, so I have yet to sit with it and really process it deeply. But I was impressed by All That Jazz. My review is in the drafts, but I think I think I'm landing on a 3.5.
Oh,
I thought this movie was really great, and I guess I feel like I have to start with Roy Schneider because he is the movie, and you both know that I've been underwhelmed by him in the past. I know he was in Marathon Man, which we've discussed on the podcast. Yeah. And longer ago, we, as a group, watched Jaws together. We haven't discussed Jaws on the podcast, but at the time, I was not so much underwhelmed by Jaws' technique as I was by its premise and its actors, Schneider included. I thought he was rather dull. But here, I cannot deny that he's pretty extraordinary, and he gives this amazing physically committed performance. So much so that it's not hard to imagine that it could kill him the way it could kill his character. He's great. He's really, really great. I have nothing bad to say about him here. I think the film does a great job of exploring the destructive nature of not just Broadway or Hollywood, but show business writ large, and how much that requires somebody to be insincere by design. I think where it loses points for me is probably the ending, which I think goes on a bit too long for me. I think you kind of get the same thing from the movie if you chop out about 10 of the last 20 minutes. But and I think his relationships with women, I wouldn't have minded a little bit more elaboration in that department. I don't think that's a wholesale negative, but just another thing I felt was missing a bit. I don't know. Maybe I'm being very particular to not give this a 4 because it is a spectacle and one deserving of the higher ratings you both have given it. But for me, for now, I'm landing on the 3.5.
Sure, yeah.
I was not looking forward to watching this. I was not looking forward to it, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Oh, nice.
And I was the main thing that was troubling me the whole time was just that stream of consciousness thing. I think it needs to be used a lot more sparingly. Now, I feel like the film's premise and origins as a semi-autobiography kind of makes that impossible because he's trying to be as accurate and plain as possible with how he would perceive things and you know, showing the audience how his mind works, essentially. Like Christian makes a good point with that ending being too long. But I feel like if you cut some of the ending out, that would detract from how he experienced it. And I feel like it's kind of a paradox. Like it's an issue, but it's also something that can't be taken out, which is troubling. So
that's fair.
I felt like that was kind of a minor thing in the grand scheme of the point of the film and the amount of definite like passion and honesty that was involved in portraying himself and portraying this character. Really, it's like a super believable character. Super believable scenarios. The nightmare kind of visions and hallucinations he has as he's slowly dying are very realistic. They're very affecting. I really enjoyed those. Honestly, I was sitting on a 4, but the whole hospital, ever since he got admitted to the hospital, that pretty much gave it a 4.5 for me. Yeah, and also acknowledging it as a musical too, because I kind of had to get used to the fact that it pretty much was a musical, just in and of itself, and just getting used to that, not having that narrative and having an overall point. Kind of just going in, just knowing like this is who he is and this is what's happening to him and how is he dealing with these issues and how does this address like major stereotypes and issues in Hollywood and trying to make it big and just being an artist, and I thought that was kind of a weaker premise, but as the film went on, it was a lot more affecting, and I really do owe a lot of that to Roy Scheider's performance. So that's why I landed on a 4.5.
Yeah, I'm definitely closer to Mitchell's side of the argument. I love this movie. This is a rare cookie pocket 5 out of 5 for me. And it's not a movie I expected to like. This is not a movie that when I first saw it, I sought out. I watched this in a class for the first time, in an editing class, where we were talking about like disjunctive editing that draws attention to itself and kind of lends to this non-linear structure that the movie has. And I really loved it. And I'm not a big fan of musicals a lot of the time. I do like Bob Fosse. I think his choreography a lot of the time has this very, as they not even allude to, as this movie addresses and boasts in its in one of its core musical numbers. Bob Fosse's choreography has a very kind of animal sexual element to it that at the time that he was working in Broadway and in film was very cutting edge, but that doesn't mean that, I'm in love with every Bob Fosse project. I kind of hate The Pajama Game, which is one of his first things that he ever choreographed. And this is not a golly gee Mr. Musical, though. This is a musical that isn't for Nana. There's really only
except the Nana at the end.
Oh my gosh.
Because there are numbers, but like you alluded to, Mitchell, there are numbers that take place because this guy exists in the world of dance and performance. So he's constantly rehearsing and working with other people, and his daughter and his girlfriend dance as well. And the only real number that you could say is like a non-diegetic number that takes place within this sort of like dreamlike artifice that most musical numbers take place in is the finale, Bye Bye Life, which a lot of people accuse of being overlong and self-indulgent. I kind of agree, but that's also sort of why I love it. I think if you're going to do like a self-hate piece like this movie, I'm kind of okay with it being a little indulgent because I think that's kind of the point. The only thing I do kind of think could maybe be cut out, I've seen this movie 3 times at this point, and as much as I like him as an actor, I really don't know if John Lithgow's character needs to be in this. Like he kind of provides a bit of a threat for like 20 minutes, but then that really doesn't amount to much of anything. But still, I've always said that a perfect score movie for me, there's either nothing wrong with it or the things that are wrong with it don't bother me. And that doesn't really bug me enough for me to count the film down in any way. Yeah, in terms of Roy Scheider, we've mentioned his physical performance. Despite the fact that he really doesn't do much dancing of his own, apparently he did a lot of work to learn how to dance in this, and I do think you could see that in just the way he moves and carries himself, because there is kind of a grace and artistic flair there that I think really works for the part. Something I did kind of want to comment on. We've talked about how nonlinear and stream of consciousness the film is. What did you guys think of the like the framing device with Death, played by Jessica Lange? Because that's something that stands out as being very much outside of Joe's everyday life. And I just wondered what your impression of that might be, because when it first shows up, we get no explanation for it, and then kind of builds as it goes on. But
Yeah. It definitely took me about 2/3 of the movie to realize that she was meant to be Death and not just another one of his flings. But I think in that way, I guess it's a clever visualization of the fact that he's flirting with death. Saying it out loud makes it feel overbearing, but in the film, I don't think it is. And I don't think it's immediately evident that that's what it means. I think it's played well. I think one of the reasons it's played well is that I think for the most part, at least, he approaches this female personified death with more honesty than he does pretty much any of the women in his life, which is telling. But at the same time, it doesn't, even though he has all these self-destructive behaviors, I don't think it's ever apparent that he wants to die, unless there's some sort of argument that his subconscious, he's so prone to overworking himself to the point of perfectionism that that's just a manifestation of wanting to die. I don't know. But as far as the device goes, I think it works rather well. And I think it's played well by both actors.
I totally agree. And I also think it helps us understand how he actually feels, like with him being honest with just her and not anybody else. It kind of helps to understand how he's actually thinking, because even when we hear like certain narrations or certain like pieces of dialogue, you don't really get a sense of how he's actually feeling. You kind of just feel like he feels nothing. And especially with the other supporting characters kind of assessing that he's really just completely devolved and insane. I think it adds a little bit of control and like a very tiny like smidgen of empathy for his character.
yeah, maybe another fitting follow-up thought to that, or consideration to that, is what do you guys think the thesis statement of this movie is? And do you think it's a
No more homework.
a positive one, or do you think it's a pessimistic one? Because the movie is very heavy, but it ends in this grand musical number with him like lovingly saying goodbye to everyone that he's loved and worked with, which feels like some sort of reclamation of like, this is my life and I'm going out the way I want to. But then it ends on a shot of him in a body bag, which is very much against the tone of that number. So I just, what did you guys get from it? Did you leave this feeling in any way positive or just bummed out?
I think the overall tone of the film is pessimistic, but I don't know. It's interesting, especially knowing that it's semi-autobiographical and that the main character is based on the man making the movie. That alone complicates things and makes the death of the character an interesting choice, because it's obviously Bob Fosse didn't die before making this. So,
but he did die after.
Yes.
From a heart attack.
I don't know. I think the relationships and the way that they deteriorate are probably the most important piece of the puzzle in deciding that it is pessimistic. And it's a paradoxical movie in that there's an obvious reverence for Broadway and cinema and entertainment, but there's also a deserved scrutiny and hatred of those things. And I think what makes this movie so great is that it's not a wholesale condemnation of either of them. It's a sort of a realistic portrayal of both and the great things that come with it. I think one of the great questions posed by Gideon's life, and I suppose Fosse's life by extension, is how much you have to surrender aspects of your personal life and relationships and maintaining them in the pursuit of creating something individual or great. And I think one of those great moments to that end is when the comic star of the movie he's working on visits Gideon while he's in the hospital and can barely speak. But he's psychoanalyzes him and he's like, I've got you all figured out. You have a deep-rooted fear of being conventional. I think that's a terrific moment. All Gideon can do is mumble a little bit because he's half dead. But I think maybe that's the thesis statement. How much a true creative struggles not to be derivative whilst also struggling to entertaining as many people as possible. I think the film at large is more pessimistic than optimistic, but I think the ambiguity of those things is part of what makes it great.
Mm-hmm.
The film, All That Jazz, directed by... I'm not doing a thesis statement, Zach.
Okay.
All right. I will say that it's adjacent to what Christian's saying, that being an artist and being successful enough where people recognize you for your work instead of who you are is kind of pretty much how the film ends. Like, he's being recognized for what he did, not who he was. Like, the number of people that say how amazing Kurt Cobain's music was are not saying how amazing of a person he was, right?
Sure, yeah.
And at least he lived long enough to make some bangers. But
okay,
that is how his life has been defined. Like, everyone knows who he is. Everyone knows what he does. Everyone knows he could be a very terrible person, but he makes amazing art, and he makes things that speak to people, that keep people interested. I mean, the producers were obviously trying to bloodsuck him at the end for all the money and everything.
Yeah.
But he did have producers, like, that they were projecting that it was going to make a lot of money, and he was going to be a successful person, and he just happened to die. And I feel like that has pessimistic and optimistic undertones to it, because it's optimistic in the sense of the art and pessimistic in the sense of the person that created it and the life that they led leading up to it.
Yeah, which, speaking of that insurance, it's so interesting watching that scene now from the perspective of, like, having bought insurance for films, because I was like, wait a minute, they just have a $1 million policy. I have a $1 million policy for, they kind of cheaped out on that. But yeah, I think it's produced and directed from a place of extreme self-loathing by Bob Fosse himself. But I do think there is a genuine love for the other people in his life and for the art that he works in. And I think a lot of the time when a movie has the message, everyone would be better off if I just wasn't around, like, it's you're almost like negging the audience, and that they say that maybe the filmmaker tries to state that in the film, but the real message is, oh, don't you feel bad for me? Wouldn't it be sad if I wasn't around? I do get the impression at the end of this movie that Bob Fosse genuinely thinks that everyone would be a lot happier if he wasn't around, and it's not like a ploy for sympathy. Because the last thing he says to his daughter and his ex-wife in the hallucination, with a genuine smile on his face, is, at least I won't have to lie to you anymore. And they're sad about that in the moment, but I think the implication is that, yeah, that's true. And his current girlfriend is with somebody new in that final musical number. Yeah, it's definitely interesting because, like I mentioned, that big final musical number feels so celebratory, even if in kind of an ironic way. And then that body bag shot really slices it off. It's like a what's that 3-layer ice cream? Neapolitan ice cream.
Neapolitan.
Because there's the musical number, and then there's the body bag, which is a harsh pivot. And then immediately after that are the credits, which are set to "There's no business like show business." So it's a real zigzag tonally and catches you off guard. Christian, you mentioned the film he's making in the film, or the film he's editing in the film, which is yet another framing device. There's quite a few frames to this film, but that's in the film they call it the stand-up. But in actuality, that's based on the film Lenny, I think is what it's called, starring Dustin Hoffman, which Bob Fosse did direct. And I think between the two, I kind of like that framing device better, because that performer who plays the Dustin Hoffman playing Lenny Bruce substitute, I think his stand-up just provides a great kind of constant narration and flow to the film, especially when we get to the hospital stuff at the end, which just hearing his kind of stages of grief routine as Joe wanders around the hospital in a haze is really impactful stuff, I think. Yeah, we've talked about the final number a bit, but I figure let's touch on the rest of the dancing and the rest of the music. Do we think it lives up to the title, the all that jazz? Is it spectacular? Is it eye catching? Or it seems to be trying to be a little more true to life? Do we think it attains that too?
Yeah, I think yes. I think that's the first easy question you've asked
Oh,
us
okay.
today. Yeah, I think it's extraordinary. I think it reflects Gideon and Fosse's understanding that dancing is inherently a physical and human thing. And I think even his sort of inclination to sexualize things or to make his shows about sex, which some of the side characters grumble about here and there. I think even that's quite earned and justifiable in the way that he goes about doing it, because it's the way that it occurs feels so natural when you see these extraordinary dancers doing these things. I think it just makes sense in a way.
It's physical and it's human, Christian. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think it just kind of lends to the whole, he doesn't really care about the individual as much as he cares about them as pieces of a whole idea.
Yes.
And treating them as like because he's seeing them all as dancers, he's kind of just seeing them all in the same blur, trying to achieve the same thing. And if they go out of that, then he gets frustrated. I mean, a little bit of a stereotype, but I think in this sense, it's its execution that really makes it a lot different than what you would expect. Were you rushing or were you dragging? Like that scene was really good. It's kind of like the beginning of his well, what is it, stage 2? The beginning of his stage 2 hypertension. Probably what it is.
Yeah.
And him talking with his wife versus his girlfriend. You have very distinct character dynamics between the two of them. Like a past person that knows everything about everything, and then like the current girlfriend's completely like just blindsided by love for him, and he's just like treating it like nothing, which is where that framing device with the with death was really helpful, where he's like, I was just lying to her. Like that was really good. Yeah, just in general, the insertion felt very, oh man, I said the insertion felt very natural. The pacing, Zach really liked that one. The pacing of each number was very good. It felt very natural. Like it took me a while to absorb the fact that this was a musical, like I said. But yeah, it was very enjoyable. I can't think of anything that really could have got cut out. I will give one mention to the smile moment with the hospital guy. That was pretty funny.
Oh.
Like just before he dies. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
All right. Yeah. Now that I think about it, the conclusion isn't the only kind of fugue musical number, because there is the operation hallucination, where there's kind of these three. It's shot as if he's directing a movie of his own operation, and there's these musical numbers where his girlfriend, his wife, all the other women he's ever slept with, and his daughter sing and dance and ask him not to go. But I think my favorite kind of moment or my favorite number in the whole movie is probably when his girlfriend and his daughter do the dance for his birthday, for Everything Old is New Again. I think that's like that's a very sweet moment. It's very funny. And also, this is going to sound kind of corny, but a few scenes before that, when he's talking to Death, he talks about, and there's this implication within the scene that this might just be more, BS that he's spouting in the name of like, oh, I'm a serious artist. But he says something like, when I look at a rose, I look up at God and I say, how did you do that? And how can I do that? And he's kind of seeking this perfect thing, or seeking something perfect that he can create. And I think during this watch and that musical number, it kind of occurred to me that on some level, even if it's not intentional, his daughter is kind of this perfect thing that he has made and is maybe one of the best things in his life. But in pursuit of, oh, well, I have to make this perfect thing, he doesn't realize that, and he kind of mistreats and neglects her. Our introduction to her is him going, I forgot I can't look after you this weekend. Sorry. So there is, I mean, he's not like a total deadbeat dad character. Like, there is clearly love there, but he prioritizes his work above everything else. Which I guess is a decent segue into the question of, despite all of the selfish things that he does throughout the movie, by the end of this, did you guys find yourselves liking or disliking Joe Gideon?
I think I don't know. I think disliking. I don't think I'd ever really. I don't think I critically thought about that while watching the movie. Oddly enough, I think one of the things I alluded to in my opening comments was I still felt like his relationships with the women in his life were maybe a bit underdeveloped. I think what saves that is his relationship with his daughter. I think is what is so important. And I was pretty nervous after that first scene you mentioned, Zach, where he's like, "Oh, I can't be there. I'm such a bad dad." And if that just became like another notch in his bad person column, I think it would have been hard to empathize with him, and hard to understand why he's given so many chances by people that aren't sort of depending on him. And I guess for the many adult women in his life, I guess the whole sort of gross casting couch element of it is a lot of why they stick around, or why he goes through so many relationships. But I still think I would have liked to see a bit more, because he's I don't know. I guess he's not ever physically abusive, is he? To my memory, but
No, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah, I just felt like I needed a bit more there. But in terms of liking or disliking him, I'd say there are likable aspects of him, and certainly aspects with which one could sympathize or empathize if you're a tortured creative. So, but his relationship with his daughter is really so important, and those scenes before the bye bye life, especially the one where his daughter takes center, and there's this really, I think, perversely uncomfortable realization that her like dancing and engagement in this sort of theatrical world like him puts her on the trajectory of being in this role that has been filled by so many people he views as sexual objects. I think that's a great and uncomfortable moment that is complicated more by the fact that he does seem to love her and has some semblance of a good relationship with her.
We got pondering
If
from
Twitter, if Twitter was around in the 70s, a lot of people would be in trouble.
Oh,
And
yeah.
maybe
Gideon
too.
wouldn't have a career in the.
Yeah. I'm gonna say I did like him. I liked him. I like him because I know that he is genuinely a good person. And I feel like the film really doesn't address a lot of things he does terribly wrong or does to purposely harm people, I guess. I mean, it depends on how much you want to, like, peg him down for being with so many women and having that moral issue, I guess. I guess how much morality you assign to that is determines how much of a person you like him as. But I do think despite it being shown so often in the film, I felt like it was more of a disregard for him than a focus. Like, he wasn't necessarily going out of his way to ensure that he had these relationships. A lot of them, I hate to say, fell kind of in his lap. I mean, as ones that we saw in the film, they were consensual. And I feel like a lot of his main creative objectives kind of come more from egotism and creative pursuit than it does sexualization. Although that's kind of a second, I feel like that's more of a secondary goal. I felt like if he was purposely trying to do this whole thing just to sexualize women and just to sleep with them, then I would think he was a bad person. But despite that substantial flaw, I would say in his personality, I wouldn't say that makes him a bad person. And obviously being a little rough around the edges and being particular about the dancing and stuff. But I do feel like that's a very common thread in in that occupation. So I gave him more credit than he was probably due, but I do genuinely believe he was a good person with good intentions that just had substantial character flaws.
Yeah, I think, but he's definitely selfish.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call him a bad person. I don't think a lot of the kind of casting couch type stuff that which you referred to, Christian, I think is that's kind of I feel when the movie came out, at least, that was kind of just meant to be viewed as him kind of being a general cad and not very good to the women he's in relationships with, rather than the much more suspect and potentially disturbing implications that it comes with now that we're in like 5 decades later in a different world in terms of how that kind of thing goes down. But I do think, even if you don't like him by the end, I do think you definitely pity him, because I think he's a great example of this archetype, which is kind of so worshipped, I think, in media and in the entertainment world, which is this kind of live fast, die young personality. He's incredibly reckless, and he doesn't seem to have any regard for his own health or condition, and seems to think that he's gonna live forever. And in that way, he does hurt the people that he loves by not paying any regard to his own health and the fact that he needs to be around for them. And by the time he recognizes that, it's way too late. I think the hospital stuff is just gutting, I think, because the first half of this film is mostly like relationship turmoil and difficulties in getting the musical on. And then everything kind of comes to a screeching halt when he's rushed into the hospital and he has an operation and it works, but then there's complications. And I think just seeing him wander around the hospital basement and eventually singing with that janitor, and as he's being led away back up to his room, his mutterings of like, this is a rough cut. I'm not done yet. I need more time. The titles aren't in, the color's not done. I thought I'd have so much more time, and now it's run out. And that's, I think pretty devastating. And tough to watch. Even if, even if all of the bad choices are his own, they still kind of come back to bite him in a way he didn't expect. And I think it's hard not to feel something at that.
I'll just butt in real quick and say that I'm choosing to live by Batman Begins morals, which is, it's not who you are on the inside, but it's what you do that counts.
Sure.
So to that end, I think as far as his actions define who he is, I would stop short of saying that he's a good person. I would not agree there. But I do think, again, that there's an ambiguity and a suggestion that he has sometimes good motivations. But maybe I'm just rambling about how impossible it is for anyone to be a holistically good person.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to go deeper into that if you don't mind. Is it just?
I don't mean to interrupt.
No. This format Zach. Is for interrupting. Please interrupt.
I was gonna say that exact quote was like the main quote that we used when we first started talking about Army ethics in my class. That was the quote that we based our discussion off of. And we had like one group of the class was like advocating for what's on the inside, and the other half was advocating on what we did. But go ahead, Zach.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was just, in terms of what he does that you feel makes him less than a good person, Christian. I just want to go a little deeper into that. Is it just kind of his relationships with women and his neglect of his family, or are there like more specific points that you felt were no-nos?
I think it's largely those two things, and I would say mostly his family. Though I guess the first half hour of the film plays a lot more of an unflattering picture of him in both regards. I think as we see more of him and his daughter, you warm up a bit more. But and to your point about it being set in a different time period, it's more difficult to be strongly critical of his relationships with women. But I still think that there's an obvious sort of power imbalance and transactional nature in those things.
I think that's still there. I'm just trying to consider what the film might have been trying to say with those things rather than what it says now, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I think
That's really hard.
yeah,
That's really
and
hard.
I think his personal selfishness is even further mitigated by the fact that he's putting the show before his own well-being too. So that only serves to complicate things more. So I'm not sure. I think you stumped me.
Hey.
I think it's so what he does versus what's underneath, right? I think it's what he does, does that directly negatively affect people's lives in the long run? We don't really know. We don't really know like the implications of how he treats others in his life because he dies, and that's when the film ends, and the film's really about him. And it's a self-indulgent film, and he's self-indulgent. So we're kind of being guided down this single path where we have to follow how he sees things and not how other people perceive him. We only get to see how other people we get to see how they perceive him in bits and pieces, but largely we see how they perceive his work. Like we get the bits and pieces with his wife and with his girlfriend and with his daughter, but they're largely encouraging him to do better. They're not giving up on him at any point. They're with him basically till the end, and they're trying to improve him as a person. And I feel like that. I don't feel like that's out of ignorance. I feel like that's out of genuine support. And I feel like like you were saying with pity, Zach, how he genuinely feels bad that he didn't give them as much attention as he could have, and he didn't develop certain relationships with them. But I don't know what the film is really saying or trying to convey directly by having all those different relationships. I don't think there's any implication that there's any further wrongdoing in that way. I think it's more just a statement of fact, like this is how he is and this is what's happening. And I don't think there's really much else we're supposed to derive from it, as much as we probably could now. I think it's just he just sleeps with his dancers and doesn't care about commitment or faithfulness at all. And that's just a terrible thing about him. And that's it.
Yeah, I think, and I do think that's in terms of like a goal for the film, I do think that's okay. I am not somebody who thinks that a film always has to have like a pointed message, but it is an interesting thing to discuss, I think. I will say, I think intentionally, the film does maybe suggest that he is, despite his daughter loving him and him loving his daughter, I do think there is some suggestion throughout that his influence on his daughter might not be entirely a good thing. Even if he's not like intentionally influencing her poorly, but like, I don't know, like a scene that immediately comes to mind is he's constantly taking like uppers and downers and pills throughout the whole movie. And there's one scene where he's hanging out with his daughter. They're in like a dance room. I don't know what that's called. Dance studio. There we go. And he pops a pill, and his daughter goes, "Oh, what's that?" And he says, "Oh, it's a mint." She goes, "Can I have one?" He says, "No." And then he puts them back in his bag, just totally within reach, within view. If she wants a mint, she could easily get one or many. And he doesn't seem to have
expected her to. Yeah.
That's not something he's really considering or thinking about or has any regard to. So yeah, that ties back into that irresponsibility. I think that's definitely an element of the film. Yeah, I see we're kind of reaching the end of our time for main film discussion. Anything we haven't covered that you guys wanted to bring up about all that jazz?
I guess I would just repeat that it's an interesting set of contradictions that is difficult to criticize in the same way that you've outlined a defense for the Bye Bye Life number, Zach. And I think another example of something that I don't know the film could or should remedy is just how kind of appealing or at least engrossing Roy Schneider is. And to that end, it feels like the film only hates Bob Fosse as much as it is praising Bob Fosse. And even though we've touched on in detail his ambiguous character in terms of his goodness, I think he's almost persistently magnetic when he's around other people and seems to be quite beloved even by people he mistreats. So I think that's, but I don't know how to omit that without missing out on some sort of relationship dynamic or portraying how integral he is to these creative endeavors. So, 3.5, very interesting, dense movie that might deserve a 4 for me, but I don't know. Definitely worth watching though.
Yeah, I do think maybe that portrayal of Joe Gideon by Scheider and that kind of magnetism maybe ties into a kind of personality that absolutely exists in the entertainment industry, where there's so many directors and so many kind of powerful producers that there will be reports of them doing terrible things. And in this case, I'm not talking about like a Harvey Weinstein, but I'm talking about maybe someone like a Stanley Kubrick, where you read about his techniques on set and you're like, my God, how did anyone ever put up with that? But then so many actors and so many crew members are like, oh, he was the most charming man. We all loved being around him. So I do think it's, there is definitely an archetype, I think, within the industry of these self-destructive, maybe even borderline abusive people that get away with it because they are so charming, and not even necessarily get away with it, because that kind of sounds like they're pulling a fast one, but they're able to do things that nobody else would put up from anybody else because of their charm and how glib they are. I do think there are people like that.
It's a main motivator for his ego. It's like one of the main reassurances that he is in charge and that it's his vision that's going to be realized. And it's necessary for him to have his vision realized, but this is probably not the way to do it. So, but my question would be, would you want to work in the Nixon White House or the JFK White House? And I think we all know the answer.
Yeah.
And so 4.5 out of 5.
Yeah. 5 out of 5 for me. I absolutely recommend it. It is hard to get a hold of.
Criterion has a Blu-ray.
You can get the Criterion Blu-ray. Cookie Pocket does not necessarily endorse or condone this, but there is a Spanish subtitled version of the entire film up on YouTube. But it might not be there for long, so check it out soon. But yeah, the Criterion Blu-ray is really great. That's how I watched the film. It's a great transfer. It's got some great special features on there as well. So I do recommend that if you're able to pick it up during the sale next month when this episode lands. If they do their annual July sale this year, I don't know why they wouldn't. But yeah, I guess week in review.
Yes. Week in review.
All right.
Oh gosh, I've got a doozy this week.
Oh,
go on.
One that I didn't really want to discuss, but when I watched it, I developed a morbid fascination for how it came into being, and it reminded me of a couple seasons ago when Zach mentioned that we watched too many good films on the podcast. It got me thinking that, okay, maybe it is useful to think about what makes a movie bad and what to avoid as much as it is to think of the inverse. So I watched a Disney Animation's Wish.
Oh my God.
Yep. Which was meant to be this grand idea film that sort of tributes 100 years of Disney animation.
Oh yeah.
And on the internet, it's pretty widely derided. There are a few people that enjoy it, and even those that do seem to measure it with it was okay or it was cute. But I found Wish to be pervasively atrocious. It really it's a doozy, man. It's a 1 star. The music is awful, and in particular the lyrics are very bad. The head songwriter for this is Julia Michaels, who is pretty accomplished in the pop field. She's co-written a lot of hits for people like Justin Bieber and Ed Sheeran, a couple of songs that I've even enjoyed. But those that I have enjoyed often have credited 5 or more writers, and there are people working on the lyrics that I assume aren't her, because there are misplaced metrical stresses all over the place. There are lyrics that make no sense. The one that I hear most often on the internet are in the villain song. The villain sings, "I let you live here for free, and I don't even charge you rent," which, of course, is saying the same thing twice.
Yeah.
There are decontextualized idioms like throwing caution to the wind is instead throwing caution to every warning sign. And there's just like dozens of moments like this where you're just like, what does this mean? What is happening? And on top of the music, the plot is nonsensical. It starts with this sort of interesting weighing of the idea of how moral it is to grant a wish, and basically the ruler has the power to grant everyone's wish, but he only grants a few wishes. And the protagonist is like, what? That's bad. You should grant everyone's wish. But maybe it's not a good thing for everyone's wish to be fulfilled on a whim without having to work for it, without a consideration of if it's good or bad for society. None of these potentially philosophical questions are weighed, and it's just kind of befuddling, because a lot of the names on this are the directors and producers and writers of things like Frozen and Tarzan and other economic and critical successes for Disney. So it's really a head scratching watch. It's atrocious. It's really, really very bad. And but I've grown fascinated with it. I kind of understand what it means to hate watch something now, because it's like watching a car crash. I've watched like the YouTube video essays that I typically avoid because I feel they're a waste of time, but I just it's fascinating to me that this was made and that they put so much merch and money into it, and it just flopped horribly, as it should. Yeah, it's an interesting way to see how the Disney formula needs talent and at least a modicum of originality to work, because it just really did not this time.
Is this the one that there was allegations of AI being used in the writing?
Yes. And this is not a punchline, but I genuinely think that the writing is more confused than ChatGPT would come up with, because there are like grammar errors and adjectives used as nouns, and like I said, metrical stresses that are all over the place. It really feels sloppier to me. And I took like a cursory look at Julia Michaels' pop songwriting, and a lot of her songs have similar, just like unrefined poetry that you would write in middle school before, like a sonnet that doesn't have iambic pentameter. It's just not. It's amateur. It really is the word for it.
Now, I remember the very first thing I think they ever released about Wish was that it was going to be about the wish in When You Make a Wish Upon a Star. Now, is that true, or is the movie just about the general concept of wishes and that was marketing nonsense?
Well, it's sort of true. There is a wishing star that shows up and is there and is a cute little merchandising opportunity that didn't work for them. And there's a bunch of noxious references to other Disney classics, like the villain says "Mirror, mirror on the wall," and Peter Pan shows up at the end, and there's a deer named Bambi and a bear named John to reference Robin Hood as well. There's a bunch of things like that, but it's not. It's so unfocused, and it really sort of betrays the magic of what a wish means in a movie like Cinderella, where somebody is wishing for something that they basically deserve, or in another film, I'm struggling to think of an example, but A Wish Where Someone Earns. There's no earning or even a depiction of something that one deserves here, because there's no real conflict. It seems like everyone's happy, and the characters are very one-dimensional. The main character has seven friends that are all very generic. And I learned after watching a special feature that they're each meant to represent one of the 7 dwarfs from Snow White. And I was like, oh, so that's why that one guy sneezes and does literally nothing else.
Does another one then fall asleep?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Wow.
And there's this, it's hilarious because there's no anthropomorphized angle for such a more basic characterization to be cute or to work. It's just shocking how much they had faith in this working is really what stuns me.
And the past 100 years of Disney has been full of racism and anti-Semitism and millions of people dying in world wars and conflict across the globe.
I didn't know Disney
That's
caused
very troubling.
both world wars.
Oh, they sure did. Well, considering they created propaganda for World War II.
That is,
yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Right in the photo's face.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, what's the most important battle in the Second World War for the United States and the Pacific Theater of them all? Why was Guadalcanal, as portrayed in The Thin Red Line?
Oh, the segues.
Yeah.
More segues than a
segue-
Weird Al Yankovic video.
Exactly. It's going faster than Paul Blart's and Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. Right. But this am I good to start?
Yeah,
I don't wanna
go
interrupt
ahead.
anything. That segue was coming out really hard. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. It took me this long to watch this for some reason. Maybe it's just because all these anti-war films I avoid and all the pro-war films are my favorites or something. But Apocalypse Now, like first time, right? But yeah, this is my first time. I actually was thinking about Apocalypse Now while I was watching it and just how different of an anti-war movie it is. Like this one is very philosophical and similar facets, but it doesn't go to the point of like major surrealism or anything. In fact, I can't think of any surreal moments in it at all besides actual things that really happened. I really enjoyed it for its grittiness. A lot of the topics that are brought up super subtly or brought up in amazing narration, which I had read Christian's review before, and I second that wholeheartedly.
Yes.
With like you literally have to like beam in like 100% brain power when you're listening to like absolute poetry of the narration, and it really supplements the story well. Yeah, I mean it's more of a battle with like nature and conscience, as I said. Like it's less about it kind of transcends the whole dichotomy between like sides, and it even transcends the fact that it's just a war and war is hell, that same freaking mantra that's in everything. It kind of just tells its own story, and it tells its own story about these are just human beings that are in a perpetual state of nature, and they're all dealing with it in different ways. And there's also a hierarchy that's involved on the U.S. side, and it really lends to that like corruption of chain of command and having that upper leadership problem, and it's just great. It also, a personal thing, it hits all the stereotypes of like a West Pointer that's a full-bird colonel that's never seen combat. It hits all the stereotypes about really bad radio communication, specifically in the Army, that isn't as much of a stereotype in the Marines. That rank structure just being as like an extra oomph to the chaos is really great. And just like the action in general was very believable. It was super chaotic. Like I really liked how they showed the Japanese side for a good bit, and some really phenomenal acting from the supporting actors for the Japanese. And yeah, a lot of those like random shots of nature and everything of all, like I feel like I know exactly what Guadalcanal looks like now, like in real life. I don't know if it was even filmed on location, but like it just you're fully enveloped in this environment, and it feels more chaotic mentally than it does physically. And I think that's just like a super unique way of thinking about it. And then just like the acting, I mean, all the actors that are in this is just absolutely insane. Like Christian mentioned John C. Reilly. He doesn't say anything, but he plays such a good like guest part. Like it's insane. Adrian Brody like barely says anything, but he has like the greatest Adrian Brody face, obviously. Probably in all the faces of Adrian Brody, this was probably one of like the scariest ones. Yeah, it was very surprising how much it affected me, and it really had a lot to say. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5.
Wow.
Apparently, Adrian Brody was at some point meant to be the lead of this film,
Yes.
and then in post it was changed quite a lot, which is interesting because as it is, it's 171 minutes long. But I got to see that one in 35 millimeter at the Cleveland Cinematheque, and that is it's a great film. Zach, I don't know if you've seen it, but you should definitely seek it out if you haven't.
I need to get on more Malick in general because I really admire the man's technique in theory, because he used to make like a movie a decade, if that, and he would shoot tons and tons and tons and tons of footage, and then edit everything down to this like collage that would be like 2 to 3 hours long in post, which is how apparently you could shoot a movie that was going to be about Adrian Brody and end up with it mainly being about like I think Jim Caviezel is the kind of the central lead. So I really need to get on more Terrence Malick. The later stuff doesn't really interest me, like Song to Song and Night of Cups and that kind of thing.
Oh, I like Song to Song,
but
that's a more controversial take.
In terms of my week, there are quite a few things I could talk about, but I think I'm going to talk about Vanilla Sky. Largely because this is the first time I've done this in a while, and I didn't even realize this until I got these movies from the library. But Vanilla Sky is a remake of a Spanish film called Open Your Eyes, which I feel like Vanilla Sky is hardly ever talked about as a remake, but it is. And watching Open Your Eyes, because I saw that first, I thought, is this really what Vanilla Sky is about? This is a bit stranger than I thought Vanilla Sky was. But it's pretty loyal. There's definitely some stylistic touches in Vanilla Sky that make it feel more like a Cameron Crowe movie. Cameron Crowe loves music, especially pop music of like the 60s and 70s, and that absolutely shows up in the film. In some places, it feels a little, I don't want to say shoehorned, but because it does make sense, but I do think it's a little over-explained in places. There's a scene where Tom Cruise and Penelope Cruz, I didn't notice that until just now, recreate a Bob Dylan album cover. And later in the movie, they go, and you recreated a Bob Dylan album cover. And I kind of think that we could have got that on our own because it's very close.
We're not all as smart as you, Zach.
But I enjoyed Vanilla Sky, I think, more than Open Your Eyes. Mainly, I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review, I think mainly because, and this isn't usually the case, usually I will like the original foreign film more than the remake, because a lot of the times a Hollywood remake is kind of watered down, I think, compared to the original. But in the case of Vanilla Sky, it's just so obvious that they have more resources and a greater budget to achieve this idea than the original did. And the original looks okay. It doesn't look egregious, but I think it was made on 370 million pesetas, which was the Spanish currency in 1997, which I did the math, I think comes to around like $20 million, I think. Which is fairly low, and you can kind of tell that they weren't working with a ton of resources, because it sort of looks like a TV movie. Despite the fact that it's meant to be kind of this future, it never really looks like anything other than 1997. The main character is meant to be kind of this selfish millionaire playboy, but he drives a beaten up hatchback hoopty. And I think that the Vanilla Sky is set in New York. It's filmed on location. It's got the cars and the apartment and the lifestyle to visually back up what the story is going for. And I think I've got to give the point to execution in this case, because it really feels like sometimes you'll watch like a movie that a director originally made as like a student film, and then they remade like a decade later when they had the money and connections to make it what they wanted it to be all along. And Vanilla Sky kind of feels like that. Though I do absolutely recommend both, even though I only give both 3 out of 5. So yeah, ping-ponging thoughts on Vanilla Sky and Open Your Eyes.
Vanilla Sky's a 4 for me. I quite like it. Big swings.
Yeah, I did see. I think I'm just less down with the general concept of Vanilla Sky. I'm trying to kind of dance around that because it is a fairly big twist. But I don't know. The twist, I think, fails to grip or interest me as a concept, which is a me thing, but does impact my feelings on both stories. All right. Is it time to run? For me to run, I better start.
Yes, you better.
Yep. Being taken away by the Angel of Death.
Man, I can't remember the last time both of your weekend reviews were things I'd seen. I feel so educated. Okay, Mitchell, I think you're starting us. Is that right? Yeah, you're starting us. Okay. And 3, 2, 1, go.
Bye-bye Life.
4 out of 5.
I gotta have a soprano.
4 out of 5.
Joe's Mama.
3 out of 5.
Supposing if Stanley Kubrick ever gets depressed.
4 out of 5.
Always saying it is excellent.
3 out of 5.
It's showtime, folks.
5 out of 5.
Covering the important parts.
3 out of 5.
Saying I love you.
3 out of 5.
Bouncy and catchy.
4 out of 5.
Real life inspiration.
4 out of 5.
Smoking Doctor.
2 out of 5.
We take you everywhere.
4 out of 5.
But get you nowhere.
3 out of 5.
A deep-rooted fear of being conventional.
4 out of 5.
Uh-oh, losing the family audience.
4 out of 5.
A 4-balloon rating system.
3 out of 5.
Lesbian scenes are a big turnoff.
4 out of 5.
Wallace Shawn in a calculator.
5 out of 5.
Diagnosed with exhaustion.
4 out of 5.
Death with dignity.
4 out of 5.
2
Heart
seconds.
attack after listening to Cookie Pocket.
5 out of 5.
Time. That was a good one. There's some bangers in there.
Something I did want to mention. It's not really relevant to the discussion, but Ariana Grande either has I think she has an album out right now, and the lead single from that album, which I can't even remember the title of, but the music video is based on the Airways dance number and all that jazz, like very closely, to the extent that it's been criticized by some people, including me, for really having no point other than stylistic repetition. But anyway, what are we talking about next time, Christian?
Did not expect your comment to open with Ariana Grande. We are discussing something I have not seen, a film called The Last of Sheila, which I know very little about, and I understand to be a murder mystery from 1973, directed by Herbert Ross. But the reason it landed on my radar at all is because it rather unusually was written by Anthony Perkins and Stephen Sondheim, two very interesting, creative people that aren't necessarily best known for their writing. Obviously, Sondheim's music is exemplary, and he's done a lot in Broadway, and Perkins is best known for his performance as Norman Bates in the Psycho franchise. But I'm excited to see what they've come up with as screenwriters here.
All right. So we'll be digging for that film next week. Perhaps we'll find a Spanish subtitled copy on YouTube.
Yeah.
Until then, bye-bye. We'll see you next time, folks.